I'm going to be doing a very brief tutorial on how to make specific chains or atoms appear or disappear in a macromolecule such as this using molecular nodes. Here I'm using Blender version 3.2, so as long as you have either that version or any other future version with molecular nodes, you should be able to follow along and make this tutorial work. I can't make any promises for any previous versions, especially ones before Blender 3.0. So I'm just going to begin styling the scene by shrinking down the molecule, setting the origin to geometry, and positioning that at the very world origin so that it's easier for me to navigate around. So go on and navigate over to the Geometry Nodes tab and add in a sidechain selection node along with a color manual node. Now I'm going to duplicate this and add that on to the very end so that I can create the beginnings of a new group node. I'm going to select all 4 of those groups and Control G that so that I come up with a new tab with all of those nodes all bundled up nicely. So I'm going to connect that group input node to the very first color and make sure that I label it accordingly to the chain that I have it connected to. And just continue on with that process for the rest of the chains. This can become a very tedious process if you choose like an extremely large macromolecule or even like a virus or something. So I'd suggest really only using this for smaller molecules, but if you have the patience, definitely go for it. Now, what I'm showing you right here is the protein data bank and the very specific molecule that I'm using for this tutorial. And in the annotation section of the entry for this protein, you can identify the very specific molecule or sidechain that you're looking at and align that with the label that is given in molecular nodes. So that's just for more bookkeeping stuff. And here is the more aesthetic side of creating the scene. My favorite site to create or use or find inspiration for color palettes is Colors, and I'm just scrolling through here until I find a palette that I think is pretty, for lack of a better word, and friendly to those who may be colorblind or have difficulty telling the difference in shades. So just going through and copying the hex values over to the color group that I've created at the very end here. And as usual, I tend to put in a nice HDRI so I don't have to worry too much about fiddling around with lighting. It just makes the whole procedure a lot more easy. Additionally, you should switch your render engine over to Cycles so you can get a better idea of how this looks in the final render. So I'm doing a little bit more of scene styling by adding in a circle, which I decreased the number of points down to 6, so it's just a regular hexagon. A nice little fencing ring, if you will. I'm going to select all of the edges and just extrude them up in the Z direction. Press Alt and click on the bottom lines and press F to create a face. And because sharp corners don't look very nice, I'm going to add in a modifier to bevel all of the edges and give it a more soft, rounded look. Here I'm going to add in an empty, not going to worry about that at this very second, and I'm going to add in a camera. Select camera to view and just zoom out so that I can fully see my molecule. and I'm going to select the empty and the camera. Press Ctrl P to parent to object, and voila. Psych! Not voila, I did it in the wrong order. I totally pranked you. Aha. So I'm gonna undo what I just did with Ctrl Z and then flip the order in which I select. So camera, then empty, and parent, and now if you move the empty, it'll move your camera along with it. It kind of makes things a little bit easier to animate, I've noticed. Here I'm making some additional adjustments to the camera's rotation, so it's not quite as wonky, and I don't have to make as many adjustments in the empty. Basically just setting the Z rotation to look more straight on instead of at a downward angle at the molecule itself. Making a couple more adjustments to the scene. So I'm going to navigate over to the camera tab and just adjust the focal range of the camera so that it takes in a bit more of our scene. Select the rendered view so that I can have a better idea of how this looks. And I'm pretty content with that, so just to speed up performance, I'm going to go back over to this very drab, boring, but quick to work with workspace. And I'm going to begin animating the camera movements. So select the empty, and we're going to begin animating it. So I'm going to finagle around with the values here until I find a rotation that I like, and I'm going to add in a keyframe just by right-clicking and selecting Add Keyframe. And the general motion that I'm going for here is the camera just switching over to the right just a little bit, switching over to the left, and then doing a full 360 around the molecule itself. Just to switch it up from my regular 360 view. I'm just trying to switch things up a bit. And as usual, you don't have to follow along exactly as I do. Just fiddle around, figure out what kind of camera movements you like. Just do whatever portrays the message or idea you're trying to convey the best to your audience. Here I just want to take it a little slow and show the different sides and angles of this molecule without doing a regular 360. So, this is the fun part. We're going to navigate to the shading editor and select the atomic material and connect that alpha node over to the alpha channel in the principled BSDF. Back in the geometry nodes, going to select the right side of the colors over here, and you'll see if you go over to the hex value, or I believe just any of the other ones, any of the other channels that has the alpha value, you can change so that you can change the visibility of that particular color. So here at the very first frame, I'm changing all of the alpha values down to 0, except for the one that I want to begin with, that I want to showcase. So if you go over to the rendered view, it looks a little weird. There's this like black, non-existent material stuff, which can be easily fixed. Either look up transparent in the search bar or navigate over to the light paths and change the transparent value up to a higher number up until you can't see any of that mysterious black non-material, and you should be good to go. I try to leave it on the lower end just in case it affects performance of the render, but nonetheless, if you have a more powerful computer, go ahead, go wild. So I'm going to increase my frame up to a higher value and increase the, well, before I increase the alpha, I'm going to add in an additional keyframe of it at 0 so that it stays at that 0 value consistently up until whichever frame I select for it to pop up. So just continue to do that with the other colors, selecting points where I want them to quickly transition from a 0 alpha value to a 1 alpha value, and just getting a general idea of how that looks over time. Going over to the camera, I know you can't really see anything, so just going back over to this workspace to double check that the camera movement is still visually pleasing to me after messing around with colors in the shading tab. And I should have done this earlier, as so should you, which is save your work, because you never ever ever know when your computer will just decide, nope, no more, I'm done. So just more tweaking, more figuring out how I want this to look, looking at the fully rendered view. And just because I'm feeling a little bit spicy, I'm going to go to the very end of this animation and select depth of field and decrease that value to a point where you can't see anything at all. So it kind of gives like that fade out, blurry effect that you'll see in some kind of more cinematic videos or renders or whatever. And as per usual, I'm just going to go to a middle frame and render this image just so I can make sure that it'll look okay in the final product. And I do want to do some additional compositing, so this will serve as our work frame, as our view for our viewer node. So after that finishes rendering, navigate over to the compositing tab, add in a viewer node, connect our image over to image, and just press the V a couple of times to zoom out. This is my staple. I really like the lens distortion. Just make sure that the value that you use for distortion itself is like extremely small, otherwise it'll make the render look strange. My go-to is 0.02. I'm going to add in a glare node, which doesn't do much with the lighting that I have at this very moment, so I'm going to decrease the tolerance for the glare effect a little bit, and I'm going to add on a color balance node. So just adjusting the colors of the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights until I get a look that I'm very proud of. So I've really kind of been digging like more bluey shadows and more yellowy orangey highlights. Maybe it's just a phase that I'm going through when it comes to compositing, but this is kind of what I ended up with. Just tweak along with whatever values you want to do. My general rule of thumb is to not have too saturated of a palette, otherwise you're more likely to have a very clashy, gross kind of image, but you know, it's your work. You can do whatever you want to. So go forth and create whatever you want to. I'm very glad that you guys came with me, and I hope you have a swell rest of your day. Thanks for watching.